If you've played a new Sonic the Hedgehog game in the last 10 years or so, you might have noticed a distinct conflict in game design philosophies, as the idea of three-dimensional navigation wrestles with a simple concept from near 30 years ago. If there ever was a recurring theme of Sonic in the 2010s, it's the indecision of whether the games should continue running along the same path, or discard all of that in favor of harkening back to the olden days. What we are stuck with is an increasingly tilted compromise, from reintroducing traditional level design concepts to straight up just having the classic Sonic as his own character in new games. It's clear that a change is slowly enveloping the series. It's not enough to just update how we play Sonic, but rather it has become increasingly pressing to ask if the entire presentation of modern Sonic has found itself becoming straight up more dated and unmodern in comparison to the rapidly growing presence of classic Sonic. A quick glance might suggest a ploy to cash in on our nostalgia yet again, but perhaps there is merit to this rebranding. Apart from the billions of Green Hill zones. Chill the fuck out with that one. Thanks. What once started out as retro kitsch has suddenly found itself more and more relevant to contemporary tendencies. In 2020, the classic Sonic aesthetic is suddenly proper chic. It validates the idea of the visual identity also being timeless. After all, perhaps to your surprise, Sonic actually has a firm grasp on design concepts that other game franchises still struggle with. Think whatever you want about his track record in games, Sonic, as a presentation and outward expression of visual ideas, is ridiculously stylish. But then again, what exactly is the classic Sonic? Where did it come from? How was it created? And perhaps most importantly, who's responsible? The early days of animation was a wild period of experimentation. Running parallel with the early newspaper comic strips, the universal ideas of how to express and signify clearly through a visual medium had not yet been established, so creators had to collectively invent a new visual language to lay the foundations of these new forms of expression. Focusing on animation, a medium birthed in neat visual effects and camera trickery, the idea of expressive protagonists were not at first a given, arguably only really surfacing with Gertie the Dinosaur, with a more clear-cut grandparent of the animated cartoon character being Crazy Cat's sideline from newspaper to film cells. This wonderful gender-fluid feline is what we could call a patient zero, with a clear through line being drawn with subsequent characters onwards. Felix the Cat evolved from an anonymous black cat into a markedly familiar face, shaped around the necessity in drawing a character again, and again, and again. The idea of how to efficiently portray a character in movement was a conflict between streamline and distinction. That is to say, the audience need to be able to recognize the character, while also making it a plausible workload to feature in animated shorts. Furthermore, they needed to design this character to be both efficient and readable for movement. No matter how culturally recognizable Felix the Cat has become, his one-tone design is clumsy and non-specific in a way that makes his body hard to read without introducing bothersome compromises like white outlines for his limbs or just limiting his poses and backdrops. Compared to a character like Coco the Clown, the contrast in simple segmentation is obvious. The design of Coco works with a limited two-tone palette to compartmentalize the character in important sets of white against black. The head, the hands, the feet, and belly helps us immediately understand where every part of Coco begins and ends. This simple little change in design lets Coco move around with the kind of ease that Felix could only wish for. Likening this to how a white person would look in a rubber scuba diving suit, with head, hands, and feet poking out at every end in clear white against the jet black of the material, this sort of design philosophy came to be called rubber hose. Following Coco the Clown, we had characters like Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, who combined the cute and compact body shape of Felix the Cat with the clear-cut segmentation of Coco, laying the final foundation for rubber hose design to be the primary way to portray moving characters in black and white. Adding to the rubber label, characters were impossibly agile in order to comically exaggerate movement and emotion, as well as famously employing four-finger hands to cut down on drawing time. And in this sense, Oswald was truly the training grounds for UB Iwerks to develop the full-fledged culmination of all these ideas: Mickey Mouse. Of course, animation history would move on with characters like Bimbo, Betty Boop, Popeye, and what have you, but for today, let's pause on Mickey. Tracking the development of rubber hose design, this little mouse boy was arguably the peak of that philosophy, being the point where distinction and simplicity coexisted in perfect harmony. And honestly, it's kind of funny that the Disney company has since tried to endlessly reinvent, recontextualize, and redesign UB Iwerks' original creation. You know, if it ain't broke. If you're not into the character design business, it may not dawn on you how disgustingly good the design of Mickey Mouse really is. Comparing with the precursor Oswald, we can note the wonderful segmentation effect a pair of gloves and shoes will make, how buttoned pants create direction, and those fucking ears! Oh boy, huh? When your character is synonymous with free circles, that's some hardcore marketability right there. No wonder this company managed to take over the world when chemistry teachers tell you water molecules look like their mascot. Truly, the simple genius of Mickey Mouse kind of hindered subsequent characters from reaching the same peak, as they of course needed to pertain to that same streamlining without overtly being the same. Which in practice meant more bells and whistles before finally just becoming other kinds of characters completely. And as technology and the industry marched forward, with boundaries constantly being pushed, that initial simplicity of black and white animation was lost in its relevance. In hindsight though, this sort of limitation posed as the perfect environment to create an archetype for how to make a character truly striking without really having to add anything. With no color and necessity for endless repetition, rubber hose design focused on speaking with raw value, black on white. It's basically character design porn, and although some core characters survived through the years, with techniques splitting off and laying the groundwork for where animation would go from that point on, it still became a sort of lost art that is to this day deeply associated with an old classic era, rather than any form of modernity. Fast forward to the threshold between the 1980s and 1990s, when Sega decided to hold an internal contest to decide their new mascot. Something to replace the rather scrappy Alex Kidd and act as a true challenger to Nintendo's Mario. Interested in the challenge, Naoto Oshima proposed lots of ideas before coming up with a hedgehog character, who he, together with Yuji Naka and Hirokazu Yasuhara, developed further into what we now know as the very first Sonic game. Looking at the visual identity of Sonic the Hedgehog, it's apparent that he is a sort of modern adaptation of the rubber hose design. Supposedly the face of Felix the Cat with the body of Mickey Mouse, Sonic the Hedgehog is a character created with full hindsight of how these things worked out in the end. His general body type is just a mid-peel in the proverbial onion layers of how Sonic's design works to its benefit. A two-tone black and white Sonic shows he's created for efficiency and readability, while still being able to maintain a pleasant familiarity. You are not mistaking this guy for anyone else. This striking design will be maintained and actually strengthened, regardless if you regress or progress further. Sonic's silhouette is centered around his spikes, which function very much like Mickey Mouse's famous ears, a sort of infinitely malleable shape that retains themselves regardless of angle, although in Sonic's case, the front-facing angle always posed an issue for years until they really got it. This isn't necessarily a fault of the design itself, but rather an effect of time moving onwards. Remember, Sonic is created to be a side-scrolling game character. He moves left to right and is meant to primarily be shown in profile. The spikes signify direction, so you always know where Sonic is faced and where he is going. You might even say that front-facing Sonic looks off because he's heading straight towards you. Oh my god! On the uttermost layer, we have color identity. Sonic is one of those few game characters that practically trademarked an entire color to themselves. Unlike any real-world hedgehogs, this boy is deep blue like the sea and the sky. But why is Sonic blue? Well, the lore suggests that... Oh, it's the color of Sega's logo. Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of, this firm link between the mascot and the parent company conveniently moves us into corporate branding and identity. You see, back in the day, Nintendo and Sega, as leading competitors, had this red versus blue thing going on. Think Coca-Cola and Pepsi, Colgate and Pepsodent. Wait, what the fuck? It's the boring mainstream that the blue faction rebelliously defies. Like, you want a soft drink that tastes like carbonic acid, or one with flavor? You want to be hip like Michael J. Fox or Michael J. Jackson, don't you? You know lame-o Kellogg boy. You eat General Mills for breakfast. No, seriously. Blue companies that are behind red companies are practically just selling you a capitalist version of alternative culture. We can mill about this all day long, but what this means in practice is that when Sega put Sonic next to Mario, their core color choices in themselves basically told you
that Sonic is the rebellious contrarian choice. But perhaps Sonic is more than just a corporate identity. Perhaps Sonic is complete. Perfect even. Today, we will make the proposal that Sonic the Hedgehog is actually the most perfect character ever conceived. We have gone from the larger picture of the wide aspects of rubber hose design and color choices, and now I propose that we look closer to the small, minute details to see why Sonic's design fucking works. Now, as you may see, Sonic the Hedgehog is comprised of 3 primary colors: blue, red, and beige. Now, if you've been paying attention, you might propose that this beige color is actually not important at all. Maybe we could have it as just white instead, just like Mickey Mouse could survive with white face and white eyes. Quite. But actually, you have to remember that this was created in a time where 16-bit graphics were cool. So why not add one more color for flavor and distinction? And this brings us to the most important part of Sonic's beige aspect, his arms. As noted art scholar Christine W. Chandler once famously said, Sonic's arms are not blue. And quite correct, Sonic's arms are not and should never be blue. So you see, Sonic's arms have to be beige, because if they were blue, they would blend with the rest of his body, and if they were white, they would blend with his hand. That's why beige is a perfect color choice, as the distinction in segmentation makes Sonic very readable when he's running or jogging or standing still. As it has been written in old scriptures, it appears that once upon a time, it was mandated by the American government that people need Sonic 3. It's not just a game, it's a human right. Thank you.
Being a product of the decade shift between 80s and 90s, it's easy to categorize Sonic as being either distinctly 90s or 80s, depending on if you look at influence or impact. That rift is pretty interesting though, as both ring equally true. Sonic and his world are shaped by design sensibilities from the 80s. There's the Memphis group, ska-inspired checkboards, the city pop flavor of Aizen Suzuki artwork, and otherworldly quality of early computer-generated 3D showcases. Sonic is an amalgamation of contemporary pop sensibilities, and as such, this informed how pop culture would progress onwards. Sonic is not 80s, and neither is he a product of the 90s. He's rather a continuation of the 80s that helped define the early 90s. Sonic's legacy is typically attributed to the countless video game animal mascots that followed him. But that's honestly a bit superficial and does the brand a great disservice. I mean, it's not for naught that early Sonic is retroactively defined as pure aesthetic. Sonic was hip, current, ahead even, and absolutely down with it. He premiered on tour with Japanese pop band Dreams Come True and everything. Sega knew they needed to get this guy right in the face of the kids. Considering how much emphasis we put on the brilliance and importance of the visual identity of Sonic, we kinda run into a slight philosophical dilemma. Absolutely serious question here. What is Sonic the Hedgehog? There is no right or wrong answer here, just a big vagueness on where you'd put your emphasis on what the question even means. In parts, thanks to the non-imaginative naming, just the term Sonic the Hedgehog in itself could mean either a character, a game, or an entire series, or hell, multimedia franchise. Obvious follow-up then, who is the creator of Sonic the Hedgehog? If you immediately thought about Yuji Naka, we're afraid you might have fallen victim to the favorable emphasis put on the development of the original game. You see, the development of the first Sonic game was very much a collaboration between three primary people. Yuji Naka, as programmer, worked diligently on developing a game concept around speed, focusing a large amount of his effort on pushing the hardware to fluidly move at such blinding speeds, creating the overall concept of a fast-moving platformer. Hirokazu Yasuhara, as lead designer, worked on the level designs, shaping the pace and nuances of the worlds you traversed and explored. Finally, Naoto Oshima, as lead artist, designed the characters and the overall visual identity of the world and game they were part of. It's not clear-cut black or white. All three of these people brought something of their own to form the whole of Sonic. You might even be so grand as to propose that each one of the three formed a point on the holy triangle. Naoto Oshima created the character, Hirokazu Yasuhara blessed us with the original game, and Yuji Naka birthed the idea of "gotta go fast!" a divine, ethereal balance of biblical quality. Bless. The first Sonic game was made by a group of individuals driving the project forward in their own ways. Attributing one in particular as the definitive author feels disingenuous to the others. Honestly, it's a bit of a surprise that Naoto Oshima didn't end up with the title as he created the actual character, but that's also key to mapping out what really happened during the early era. Yuji Naka took the crown from recurring involvement more than anything. Let's just chart some things out quickly here. After the development of Sonic 1, Yuji Naka and Hirokazu Yasuhara reconvened in the US to develop Sonic 2 with an American team. Meanwhile, back in Japan, Naoto Oshima developed Sonic CD, of which key staff goes on to create Knuckles Chaotix. Back in the States, a hand-picked A-team from Sonic 2 involving Naka and Yasuhara goes on to create Sonic 3 and Knuckles. The remaining B-team creates Spinball and then goes on to develop Sonic Extreme with involvement by Yasuhara, fresh from Sonic 3D. Back in Japan, Naka and Oshima reconnect and forms a formal Sonic team together with the developers of Ristar. Their first game is Nights into Dreams, followed by Sonic Jam. Following the development of Sonic 3D, developers Traveler's Tales make Sonic R with input from Yuji Naka, Naoto Oshima, and Hirokazu Yasuhara, making that the only other game all three were credited on. Fucking Sonic R. What the fuck? With the chaotic Wild West years out of the way, Naka and Oshima collaborate on their last game together, Sonic Adventure. After which Sonic's development timeline mostly falls neatly under the Sonic Team tag. Except all of the handheld games, oh my god, please stop fucking When we map out this divide and progression of workforce, some logical connections and realizations dawn on us from the added context. Is the true MVP behind the highly beloved original trilogy actually level designer Hirokazu Yasuhara, whose departure marked a stark switch in the series' critical reception? Is Yuji Naka's role as auteur legitimized by his strict involvement with only mainline games, or are they only considered as such because of his involvement? Most striking for today's subject though, when you realize just how much Naoto Oshima shaped the visual identity of Sonic, it's laughably apparent how much his absence is felt in games like Sonic 2 and 3, while being perhaps the most striking quality about his solo project, Sonic CD. Sifting through the concept work for the first Sonic game with the context of Sonic CD, we get this small suspicion that perhaps the visual identity of that game was more of a sober compromise than a full-out expression by Oshima. It's even more apparent when looking at how 2 and 3 evolved without him. Sonic 2 was more down-to-earth, with levels being set in more thematically neutral environments. Compare, for example, the gritty factory backyard of Spring Yard and the less imaginative standard nighttime casino theme of Casino Night Zone. Say whatever you want about the qualitative differences between the first and second Sonic game, there is a clear switch in aesthetic conceptualization. The world of Sonic 2 pivots towards a consistent diegetic place, with a clear basis in our own reality, with a late-game emphasis on transitions that give each level a context in relationship to the last. This would form the foundation of the world design in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, where Sonic is exploring one set environment, Angel Island, where acts lead straight into one another and zones end on little cutscenes to show how Sonic got to where he is. This approach of seamlessly coherent worlds are still felt in games to this day, where every segment flows into the next, giving the impression of the world being more of a real place that you can wrap your head around. Sonic 3's subtle cinematic flair is a cool feature, and it's easy to see why it was co-opted by other game developers. However, this aspect wallows around in a rather literal idea of cohesion. That consistency can only be reached by appropriating reality through a spatial level. Everything is what it is and where it is. No wonder this would culminate in the openly explorable adventure areas in Sonic Adventure. After all, they've been heading straight towards that point ever since Sonic fell down that hole in the first game. Now look at Sonic CD. Back are the non-sequitur level transitions. Cut to black. Where are we now? Of course, this was made before Sonic 3, so it's not so much a conscious decision as industry standard. But Sonic CD equally emphasizes a desire to add cohesion to the internal game world. Only in this case, through time instead of space. This is a brilliantly simple but effective way for an artistically inclined person like Oshima to explore the aesthetic of Sonic's world, by imagining the same place in 4 different time eras. This way, every zone can be independent of each other, acting more as little ecospheres than a sprawling interconnected world, without losing that diegetic cohesion. As such, every level of the game goes through great lengths to explore the foundation and continuation of an aesthetic idea. From simple things like lush nature either being preserved or ruined, and the complexities of urban city planning, to how industrial areas might steer in different directions, both literally and figuratively. Of course, it's a shame that there is no reason to go to the future, and that trying to go back and correct the past is a massive hassle that makes the game into living hell, but that's besides the point. Sonic CD is perhaps one of the most divisive games in the entire franchise, with opinions conflicting back and forth heavily between it perhaps being the best one, or the worst one. We've come back to this several times over the years, and never really figured out what we really think about it, and maybe that's exactly why it's so endearing. It's a complicated relationship that grows soft in your head when you leave it be. The seductive siren song of Sonic CD. Absolutely cursed. Our proposal is that this appeal is partly derivative of its aesthetic quality and how the entire experience is centered around that. You know how Tails is orange, the complement color of blue? So you can differentiate the two characters. And how Knuckles is Red Sonic? Obviously it works. It's classic and perhaps incidentally iconic. But look at Amy's design and how despite just being pink girl Sonic, she's also reflecting the design sensibilities of the time, just like Sonic does, but this time through women's fashion. We could talk about the use of women as an attribute at another time, but the takeaway is that a character like Amy arguably has more going on looks-wise than the most obvious orange animal being foxes. Look, Kiki fucking loves CD Amy, she can't shut the fuck up about her. Just let her have this. Also, Metal Sonic, everyone's favorite, almost criminally good. Look at that bad boy, basically just being shiny Sonic. What's his secret? No addition. You want to make a striking character from a pre-established base? Don't add things, just change them. You see, Metal Sonic is cool, because secretly, Sonic is just as cool. They just removed emotion, which creates an emotion in itself. Pair this with a well-composed but distinctly contemporary soundtrack, and Sonic CD stands out as being one of the most hip games in the franchise. at least through a Japanese early 90s lens. This is one of those extremely risky slippery slopes to tackle, and it's honestly arguable whether Sonic CD still feels fresh out of deliberate design, or if they just got extremely lucky that these design sensibilities in particular aged with grace. Sonic certainly had less fortunate encounters with modern design trends. You could say it all went downhill after Knuckles' Chaotix. You only arrive at the Sonic Adventure menu design if you've already lost control previously. This doesn't just happen to anyone, kids. What's concerning about Sonic CD being this pure distilled essence of classic Sonic's visual identity to a much greater extent than Sonic 2 and 3 is the additional aspect of those games being arguably significantly better than Sonic CD. There's a reason those are seen as the classic games. They're straightforward and build upon the core ideas that made the first game so fun to play. In practice, this means there's no consistent true version of classic Sonic, as what truly defines that essence is fragmented across different games and media. Seems though that the very striking visual identity might have been the easiest way for developers to convey the idea of classic Sonic instead of through tangential game design. This might be a consequence of previous attempts of going back to the roots, consistently failing despite such high demand for it. Be it Sonic Advance, Heroes, Unleashed, Sonic the Hedgehog 4, you name it. Is it any wonder they ended up just rehashing the old design for Sonic Generations? But might the success of Generations also have skewed Sega and Sonic Team's perception of this whole matter? In a context of them spending a good part of a decade trying to recapture the magic of old Sonic, it kind of follows that they would just shove classic Sonic into Sonic Forces. Because from their perspective, that's what worked last time. They had this idea that that is what's going to work this time. But it didn't, because classic Sonic is something more than just an aesthetic. It's laughably obvious in hindsight that the only way they really tried to recreate classic Sonic previously was through purely aesthetic means. Apart from just putting Green Hill Zone in every darn game, it was always very shallow ideas like Sonic should be 2D, Sonic should only go fast, Sonic should be alone, a zone is a drama in 2 acts, Sonic's eyes aren't green. When Sonic Mania was announced, there seemed to be a collective sigh of relief throughout the video game community. That Sega finally tried to portray Sonic's root through game design rather than any external factors. Obviously, the game looks just like a lost 90s Sonic game, but it didn't really need that to recapture the core of what people would come to expect from a retro iteration of the games. And isn't it really ironic in that sense, that we gladly attribute the creation of Sonic the Hedgehog to game engine programmer Yuji Naka, when what commonly seems to be regarded as the character's roots in modern times is the exterior by Naoto Ushima. Jeez man, you got duped. So sorry. We've gone quite a long time now without anything really new from Sonic Team. It's not a stretch to imagine that's greatly because of the success of Sonic Mania and how that fared against Sonic Forces. In a sense, the clash of those 2 games back in 2017 was an ordeal of how the idea of classic Sonic should be brought forward. A game that tried to, well, be the old games, versus a game that just threw in a character that looks like old Sonic. It's likely that Sonic Team looked at the result in panic and that the only real outcome is to just rethink everything. We just have to wait and see what they come up with. Perhaps they reboot the entire franchise in an entirely new direction. Maybe they just ignore everything and keep going like before. Or perhaps they double down on what now worked and make Sonic a distinctly retro thing, cashing in on millennial nostalgia. And doesn't that sound nice? We wouldn't really mind Sonic being design porn, but on the other hand, none of that would reflect on the actual games being, good. At the moment, classic Sonic is untainted, a symbol that oozes quality. It's the strongest Sonic concentrate. Sega could easily exploit this to strengthen Sonic's image again, start a new clean page, and make the brand fresh again. And for a start, this might work. Say a Sonic Mania 2 is in the works, and it's good. That'd be great, but it would also cement further for Sega what actually sells. This love for classic Sonic, a longing for the past, could ultimately be weaponized against us. We'd basically just lend corporations an easy and effective way for them to sell us products based on surface level values. As long as something looks appealing, we'll buy it. Suddenly, we might build new bad associations to the old paragon of nostalgia. Suddenly, we might find ourselves tricked into buying and consuming products from a brand that we might actually be tired of. Suddenly, classic Sonic may become crap just because we loved him too much. And the scary part is that we would love him too much to notice or even care. Because just like you really want that cool Mickey Mouse thing, don't you also want that Sonic crap you don't really need? Don't you? Of course you do. You've always done that. You love Sonic. We all love Sonic. We've always loved Sonic. Thank you for watching this Sonic bullshit all the way to the end. Wow! Amazing. This video wouldn't be possible without all these lovely people, all these prime suspects.
They are as follows: Sweet Pink, Baba Kenzie, Joel Nilsson, Andrew Jones, Anonymous, Huang Wu, Meowmix64, Clara Ros, Mattias Graman, Nate Kiernan, Ben Clark, Nishtschwät, Athayet, K. Axwell, Tommy Håkansson, Sci-Fi, Trash Baby, Preston Manes, Emrasa, Mar B, Borts Frivarg, Jerry Olsson, Gage McColgan, Chloe is Ben's favorite human, Loke, That Jess, Andreas, Arin Rain, Tough Emily, Portraits, Karen Schultz, Emil Olin, Andreas Harglander, Oscar Funes Galindo, Magnus, Jentu, Silly Rookie, Starfighter, Morgan, Biopanda, Casey Explosion, Flim Flamberge, and Riley Rose Smith.
If you also want to be on this list of lovely people, you can do that by supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/transparens.
This will also grant you access to our Discord server where there's lots of fun happening every single day. See you there!
Post your OC.